education as well. So
AIA Indiana / Indianapolis has sponsored this since 1970. The other big piece AIA does is they'll get involved in legislation and law writing and weighing in on legislation. Architects always feel a sense of responsibility and ownership of the cities that we live and work in. And so it's very important to us that things, laws that are passed that might affect the community and the city, we tend to get involved in it. We always try to advocate for better and advocate for the good of the city and advancement of good design and things. Just last week, there was a proposal to start putting billboards up all over Indianapolis. We're trying to allow right now. Billboards are kind of the eyesores. We went and spoke to that, and we're able to keep Indianapolis from being covered in billboards. Just those sort of things that we think about. For about 40 minutes, but it's not really a joke. This is kind of everything that we cover, except we're just going to do it a little bit faster than you would if you were going to college. But so go for it. You'll get 3 credit hours. Right, and they're transferring credit out.
Absolutely free. Actually, you write a check. But no, as Brendan said, this really is kind of meant to be like what you call an ARC 100 or a first level course to really capture a lot of the lessons that you learned that entire first year in architecture school. So this is super informal. Okay, if you've got a question, just shoot your hand up, no problem. Don't be afraid to ask or stop me at any point. So, like I said, we'll try and keep it super casual. So
if you need a donut halfway through, feel free. Just slow it down.
So the topic of the day, we wanted to kind of arm you with the information that would help you best approach the competition program that you're working with or a problem like that. So we're going to start at the very beginning and talk about conceptual design. We'll talk about the design process. There's a process for design. We'll describe what it is. We'll talk about what a concept is. There are different ways to approach design. Not everyone approaches it the same way. Different architects, different designers have different theories, philosophies, strategies for solving a problem. Or oftentimes you might shift between any one of those multiple philosophies as you work on the problem. And then we'll talk about, once you've investigated the problem and actually dug in and kind of sink your teeth into it, what tools, what analytical tools, what design tools can you use to help you solve the problems that you'll find in your company. The next talk we'll talk about is this diagram illustrates not just architecture, but almost any kind of design process that it's both linear and cyclical. There's a start and a finish, but it's not necessarily a straight line and you find the answer and you're done. In the beginning, you research the problem, you understand the background of the problem, you try and get more information about what it is you're trying to learn about. You analyze that research, you find out, okay, I've got some raw data, but what does it mean? I've read this in the program, but I have questions about it. So you really want to try and understand what it is that's being asked of you before you just jump in and try and solve the problem or propose a solution. Once you've done the research and understood what it is you're being asked to design, once you've understood the background of that whole concept and that problem, then you can kind of start to work it. Rarely do you nail in the head and stumble upon the right answer at the first time. So you're just refining that loop until you get a closer and closer, a better and better solution. And then at the very end, you've got the final package, but you're still not done because you may encounter that same kind of problem for another client next month or next year. And that gives you a chance to start this whole process again and then evaluate all the solutions you came up with last time. So again, the process starts over and it's both kind of linear and cyclical again.
To point out right here, this is actually my favorite arrow. It's pretty often that everybody wants to stick with their first idea, and it's almost never the case. The first idea is your next idea. Usually it takes you'll get to the end of the recipe. So don't ever be afraid of busting aside and starting over. Now, don't waste much of time like you're finding an idea that you don't think is great. Go back to the drawing board, and do the thing. But, never be married your first idea. There's a quote with Richard Wilson. Essentially, nothing's as dangerous as an idea. It's the only one you have, right? So that'll give you tunnel vision, and you never think any bigger than that. And that's going to really keep you from possibly making you better. So feel free to possibly decide. It doesn't make you better. It actually makes you better.
And also, if you have no idea what to do, this process can help you. Just by going through the process, you'll learn. You'll jump into it. Something will come to you as you engage in this. So it's like if you're being asked to write a 10-page, just sit down the day before and start on page 1, the first word, and work all your way down to page 10. You come up with a very rough draft. It gets worked into a little bit more of a more refined draft, and then you get a more polished draft, and then you finally get a final draft. So by going through that draft process, you can kind of take that whole 10-page paper and make it a much more manageable problem. Design is exactly the same way. And I think as clean as this diagram is, really, it more often happens like this, where the width of this squiggly line indicates the range of solutions you're studying. So you're studying a lot of possible ideas up front. You're brainstorming, right? That looks like brainstorming. And you're throwing out some of those ideas that may not work. You're kind of narrowing in on an idea or a couple ideas as the timeline goes on. And then about 2/3 of the way through, now you're onto that one idea, and you're really just refining. We had to kind of go through this uncertainty to narrow down and hone in on that one specific idea. So this is probably a little bit more of a realistic depiction. It's not always so clean to be broken into discrete phases just like this. The process really can be kind of chaotic. And that's okay. So let me ask a question at this point. Which of these two vehicles is a better design? It might seem like a strange question for an architecture design workshop. So we've got a Ferrari and a minivan. Which one of those would you say is a better design? Oh, awesome, volunteers. Yes. Exactly. So it's kind of it's an open-ended question. It depends is the right answer. So if you want to create a fast, nimble, agile, maneuverable car, the Ferrari is the better design for that. If you want to create a vehicle like what you're after, this competition is very similar to this problem. So you're being given a problem statement to design something. It's up to you to tell us what you want to make of it. And I think the biggest shortcoming we have is students will enter the competition, and for example, they'll say, I'm going to design for you a vehicle that's really sleek and maneuverable and agile. Here it is, and they show us the minivan. It's like, well, okay, time out. You didn't do what you told us you were going to do. We don't care as judges whether or not you want to design the Ferrari or the minivan. We just want to make sure that thing, that those goals that you set for yourself, that you're actually meeting those goals. We could agree or disagree with those goals as judges, and that really doesn't matter quite so much. It's just that we want to see that your final form matches the concept. Program could say, design me a vehicle that carries at least 2 people that gets from point A to point B. Well, both of these do that. But it's up to you to say, you know what, I want to put a little bit more thought into that program, and I really think that vehicle needs to be A or B, and that's going to lead you toward one solution or another. So you're exactly right. It depends on what you're aiming for as to which one of these makes a better design. So in the world of infinite possibilities, explain why you chose to do what you did, and hopefully at the end you'll be able to have a competition entry in images that if someone were to take the text off and throw all the text down in a pile, and they would read, your paragraph, your concept statement, they would say, oh yeah, that's right there because that one does that. If we can't do that with yours at the end, that's where you're less likely to find. Anyone ever own one of these or have one of these? How well do the scissors work on that? Not very well. How well do the pliers work?
A little better.
Yeah.
A little better, but not.
In a pinch and emergency, you need the bottle opener to open something, or you need the scissors. It's there. It functions. If you're lost in the wilderness, it's better than nothing. It does 20 things at a very mediocre level, but it does nothing really, really well. We find those kinds of buildings too, so you can kind of get, put blinders on or get tunnel vision and kind of read through the program and say, okay, I've given you a lobby, I've given you restrooms, I've given you circulation, I've got a space for this and space for that. But if you haven't really prioritized anything, you're going to end up with the Swiss Army knife, where you've met all of you've given us all, but that building does nothing exceptionally well. It's just kind of checking all the boxes.
Anybody ever tried to use the scissors in the Swiss Army knife? Well, in case you haven't, they're terrible. Yeah. And every other one of these tools is terrible. But it is handy if it's the only thing you've got. That's kind of the big idea here.
And there are buildings that this is the correct approach, that it needs to do 20 different things and it needs to do them all fairly well. There are other buildings that are more like the Ferrari building that say, you know what, in this building, this one function matters so much. We're going to pursue that at the disadvantage almost of the ability to perform these other functions. So we've talked a little bit about the design process and kind of given some diagrams of it. A concept essentially is what you intend that design to achieve and how you see that. These are different philosophies for getting through that design. So one possible way is what we call a functionalist concept. So in functionalism, you're just designing something to work. You don't really care what it looks like, you're just making it work. All kinds of objects in this room, in your life, are designed that way. I'll bet most things are designed this way. Even a lot of buildings are designed this way.
Okay. I always like the paperclip as an example of design. I suspect no one's ever really thought about the paperclip as an example of design. But the reason it's awesome is because it's real close to perfect. A version of the paperclip has been around for about 100 years. It's been more or less this. It's really tough to improve on this. You couldn't take away like the same thing, and it does it all, and it's very cost effective, and it's perfectly suited for just that one thing. And kind of, you can think about buildings like that too. If there's things that you can take away or strip away from the building that aren't really doing anything for your design, and you want to question why you still have these things. That's more of a modernist, functionalist approach, but it's one way to approach creating something.
There's nothing on this paperclip that's there just for show. There's nothing about that paperclip that's made to make it look good or look pretty or beautiful or sleek. It's just made to work.
And its design comes exclusively from what it needs to be to do its job. Right? And so if you think about your building having a job, your building needs to receive these drones. Your building needs to be open and welcoming for its customers. Bring about these qualities the building needs to have. You can start to, edit your design and strip away the things that maybe aren't as necessary, and reinforce the things that are.
So I like to compare this example back to the Ferrari. This, like any jet or fighter aircraft or bomber or what have you, is designed by teams of lots and lots of engineers. They have two criteria: to make it work or make it work better, and then to make it cheaper. To make it work better and to make it cheaper, and to make it work better and to make it cheaper. And that's all they're guided by. But at the end, it's kind of interesting because I think this is sleek and in some ways kind of resembles a sports car. And just a show of hands, how many think that this jet looks good? How many think that it looks attractive? And I do too, which is interesting because there's not a single person on the design team for this aircraft who is tasked with making it. There's not a single person who's that. In a way, it's kind of like, evolution in nature. You find forms that do things remarkably well just because they do things well. And so if you're kind of avoiding trying to make something look good, if you're just focused on function, it doesn't mean you'll come up with something that's ugly. In fact, quite the reverse sometimes. You'll come up with a solution that's very elegant because it satisfies its function very well.
What happens a lot is that somebody will have a picture of this building in their head or this form or the shape in their head, and then they'll try and cram the things into it and like force that building to be something that it's not really made to be. I thought about it the opposite way. I thought about the jobs, what this building will accomplish. If you want it to be, the first, I think, supersonic aircraft in the world, like one of the fastest things man has ever made, you might expect to have these things turn into that's something on black.
Which is interesting. You ask a lot of architects or people, who's more creative, an architect or an engineer? Or which profession is the more creative profession, architecture or engineering? Honestly, a lot of architects will say, architects are more creative. Why? Well, because architects care about what things look like. They're trying to balance all these solutions. And I would kind of, even though I'm an architect, I would question that. A lot of the more revolutionary or innovative things in our world are designed by engineers that really change how we live and change how we function. In an ironic way, they're more creative because they don't care what things look like. And caring what things look like can in some ways kind of be blinders that say, okay, I'm not going to consider this range of solutions because I don't like the way it looks. And so I think a lot of architects are kind of guilty of doing that. So that was these two kind of concepts. Approach of making something, designing a building, you're hardly ever following just one of these concepts. You're kind of jumping around between them. The flip side of that, and obviously, house is not purely a formless concept, but the design of this facade was much more governed by trying to make something attractive, noble, beautiful, well proportioned. It could have looked like a lot of different things, but obviously a lot of thought and attention went into proportion, rhythm, harmony, symmetry, contrast, balance, etc. All those kind of terms you learn in art class that you again practice in architecture school. Another example, wildly different style, but in this building, this one is symmetrical, balanced, harmonized. This one is asymmetrical, you might say dynamic, so a different value. It's still governed by trying to make it, look like a form that's interesting in a lot of ways.
One of the things that I think is interesting about this slide is because it's, there's a series of rules that the architect has kind of set up for himself, right? One of the biggest ones is it looks the same on both sides. And maybe that's the right solution. But if you can picture the floor plan of that building, like what would happen if you really needed to have a restroom here, and you really needed to have a conference room here? Right, the set of rules that architect has set up, this space and this space fundamentally can't look different. So you've missed out on an opportunity either to have like a nicer conference room, or you're wasting what could be a nice piece of your facility on a restroom that you can't have a window, right? So you're kind of wedging yourself into a solution that might not necessarily be.
And in this, for example, you imagine that up here at the top left corner where all those big windows are and that overhang is, there might be a nice space up there to look out over the city. It's kind of a vista. There probably could be even a balcony up there on the other side. You have that same opportunity on the top right side of the building. In fact, it looks like that might not even be windows. It might just be ventilation for rooftop mechanical units that sit up there. So they made the decision to put that vista side, that viewing side on the top of the left, and keep the top right as a mechanical area. So it's asymmetrical, but that works with their modern aesthetic. It didn't have to be symmetrical like previous examples. This next one is kind of interesting because this is also a case, we're kind of moving into a different concept of experiential concepts where you're not designing the building to look like something, you're designing the building to experience, to feel or experience something unique, almost to the point where the building itself disappears. You're not really looking at the building. So in this case, we've got this tunnel, and I think it's always interesting here. You know, the guys on his cell phone, these two are having this conversation. They could be looking at the sharks and the stingray, so they're just kind of carrying on their day as usual. They could be on a sidewalk in the street, so they really should be kind of pressed up against the glass, as you would expect. But so the architect or the engineer of this space thought it was paramount to let people experience the aquarium around them. So they made that glass tube as open and as clear as could be, with as few joints and as few extra parts and pieces. They obviously did have to set, you know, joints periodically. You can see they've got floor registers in the floor. They've got some patterning in the carpet, but there's nothing in the Instead, the idea is, no, look out there, and the architecture plays a supporting role to enhance that experience. Here's another kind of example of a pop-out box of a building.
Do we know where this is? Been there?
That's the Willis Tower.
Yeah, Willis Tower in Chicago. So you walk out there, you can look down through the glass, you can jump on the glass. It's not gonna, it might crack or shatter, but it's not gonna break and let you all the way through. One would hope not. But this box was not designed as a proportional item to put on the outside of the building to make the composition of the building look interesting. It was designed to let the inhabitant have a certain unique experience, kind of like the tube through the aquarium.
Raise your hand if there's no way in on Earth that you ever step. So now imagine if that glass box was made out of concrete. Would it scare you? Probably not.
Yeah,
You'd still be hanging over a building. It should still be all the exact same amount of scary. It's possible that that glass and that steel structure could be probably just as strong as it could be out of concrete. And there's no logical reason. But the real logical reason is it's a real experience, and it like speaks to your phobias to look down and not see anything underneath you for, I don't know, 80-some stories. I thought that. Big, right? But if you couldn't see that, you couldn't have that experience. This wouldn't scare you at all. Just be nothing. You wouldn't have any thoughts about it. And so it's a beautiful example of really art and architecture. Just because of simple material choice. Just by going, oh, we're going to make out of glass, which is concrete. Now it's something that's super powerful. You know, that you think is going to give you an experience.
This treetop walkway that lets you experience the tree canopy. You see people in the center of the triangular area. They're actually sitting on a net. There it is up there in the top corner. So not quite as high up off the ground, but still, this is another building, if you will. It's certainly part of the built environment that lets you go up and inhabit and feel like what it feels like to be up in the trees. They have to have guardrails. They have to have planks in the walkway. But it's not so much one of those, hey, look at me examples of structures. It's really just trying to foster a certain kind of experience. Now we'll move into something a little bit different. We're going to talk about metaphors and symbolic concepts. So we're back to looking at the way that a building looks like, but instead of just trying to look at a graphically interesting pattern or composition, instead of just trying to look good or sleek or cute or interesting, it's actually a symbol in there. This is a TWA Kennedy Flight Terminal in New York City, designed by Sarahman. Anyone been here? Kind of underwent a renovation recently. This is a concrete building. So knowing that this is an airport, what idea do you think this form is supposed to convey? Any guesses? What's this? Why this shape or why this form? You're volunteering, yeah, go for it.
It's like a bird.
It looks like a bird. It could be wings. It probably somehow conveys the idea of flight. So you're about to get on an airplane. You're about to fly somewhere. It conveys the idea of flight, whether it's an airplane wing or a bird wing or what have you. It speaks to the function of that building. So it's a metaphor for flight. It's a metaphor for taking off and going into the air, which is ironic.
That's really important. Like if I ask somebody, you know, we're making this building that I want you to invoke flight and think things that are light, that are airy. right? And Sarah didn't use heaviest building material we have. We used rocks essentially. But it was able to sculpt it in a way and think about it in a way that it was flowing and organic. It was sculptural, so that it still has the kind of conveys the idea.
If we go back, so this building, for example, this doesn't mean or convey anything. It might look good, it might be a graphically interesting composition, but it's not conveying an idea. That's not to say that it's better or worse. It's just a different approach. The risk you run with something like this is that someone may not get what that architects do, some don't. So this is an example of very, very literal symbolism. You're just making the vehicle again a replica of that.
So everybody knows it's supposed to be, Brandon. Go back to the Saturday airport. Imagine if he just made that look like a pigeon, right?
Yeah.
Kind of a joke.
Or an airplane. Yeah.
Versus like this really interesting kind of piece of architecture that's been inspired by an idea. I don't know how you inspire a vehicle by a hot dog.
So the concept there is abstraction. This is an abstract idea of flight. Making it look like a pigeon or an airplane would be a literal idea of flight. So this is a literal idea of a hot dog. I don't know how you do an abstraction of a hot dog, the way it smells or tastes, but if you were creative enough, perhaps you could. So we've kind of run through different approaches to design. This third part will really tell you how to tackle the design problem we physically do as architects to design or to work through the different problems in the design. There's four pieces here. We start, and this kind of goes back to the linear method. We start with the big problems and we work toward the small problems. You're not going to want to jump in and design the door swing in the closet before you've taken a look at the site in general and got an idea of where the entry of the building needs to be. So the biggest, most broadest part of the entire problem is the site and the context. The context essentially means what's around it. How does that thing fit into the area that's around it? The tool that we use to look at that is the site analysis. So the very first thing we want you to tell us on your competition, in every single year's competition, is provide us the rationale for why you can walk us through those very first broad brush steps. Why did you choose to give the building this large footprint? Why is it over in the corner of the site versus over in the center of the site? Walk us through why and how the building addresses the site the way that it does before you even take us inside. This diagram over here is called a transect. So when we talk about context, the area that the building sits in, this one breaks it down into four different kinds of context. Up at the top, you've got wilderness or just raw, pure nature. At the very bottom, you've got a dense city, a town, and then you've got varying degrees of overlap in between. So that third one might be more akin to a suburb, where it's got a lot of built environment, a lot of houses, but there's still a little bit of nature there. The second one is more like a rural village, where it's mostly nature, 75% streets, buildings, and that kind of thing. The kind of building you design should or ought to change depending on the context you build it in. So if you design the building for this tight urban city context, and you just showed me the building, I ought to know by looking at the design of that building what kind of context it fits in. So what we most often run into when students approach this problem is they just show us the building, they show us the floor plan, they show perspectives, but they don't show the site plan. They don't show how the building fits into the site. So for an example, they might show a box with an all-glass wall on one side. Well, why is that wall all glass? What are you looking at? What's out that direction? Is there some ultra-critical view or magnificent vista out that direction that causes you to have glass and it's designed for the building effect? In order to know how to do that, you undertake a site analysis. So this is a plan diagram of the city. We've got sketch arrows, colors, and graphics notations of all different kinds. you might be looking at where does wind come into a site from? Where does the prevailing wind come in, west or northwest or southwest? Where does the daylight come into the site from? Which way does the building need to face in order to maximize daylight? Where are the flows of vehicles? They could be cars arriving for people to inhabit the building. They could be service vehicles like trash trucks and service trucks wanting to go to the back of the building to drop off supplies, or like in the mall around us to go to the back of the store to unload all the clothes, to go into the store, whereas the customer parks it out of their car and they walk in front. So what other kinds of things might be diagrammed on the site? Whether jump in anyone on that.
Use wins. So I think the big picture takeaway though is like a lot of people have a hard time starting. This is by far the best way to start. Doesn't mean you don't have to start with like this. So you're gonna sit down and you're gonna look at your start, you're gonna look at your site and you're gonna go, all right, what do I have to work with? Where are people coming from? All the direction people are coming from, that's probably where your engine's coming from. Where's the sunlight coming from? All right, well if there's sunlight coming from there, I don't want to light some space up, well maybe this is what I want to put my windows on. Where's the wind coming from? If I want to have an outdoor closet in the winter, maybe I need to put some walls up to like protect the space in the winter. Or maybe they want to capture that wind in the summer, right? To make it more cool it off in the summer.
Or maybe there's a view that's a particularly bad view. Something across the street. You turn away from that, or you make that wall or that side opaque so people didn't see that.
Noise. But the idea is if you sit down with the site plan and then you essentially draw on the pocket, right? You start thinking about these things. Then once you've got this site considered, then you can start to pick out the areas where the different parts and pieces of your building are going to want to go. Like the site will almost tell you what the right answer is for what you're trying to do. And that's how you get started. There's probably a lot of evolution that goes from there.
Yeah, the site analysis really should make the floor plan for you. The site analysis will help you determine where the building sits, which way it faces. You really dig into this before you start doing any floor planning, because that floor plan is just a finer grained view of this, informed by this process, if that makes sense. This is another example just on a campus, the path of the sun, good views out toward the bay, some pedestrian circulation and things like that. So understanding how that building fits in its context is the first problem you have to solve in the design. What commonly goes wrong at that stage is being oblivious to the site, not doing a site analysis, not looking beyond the border of your walls to find out how that building should be structured. So do the site analysis at that stage, and you'll be far ahead.
I would say, what percentage of entries do you get without any reference to the site? 80? I was going to say 70. But it's a lot, right? But it's the most fundamental beginning to the architecture. You guys have never, ever in your lives, ever seen a building that didn't sit somewhere, right? You got to go somewhere that go next to a building. Things are happening. You're missing out on something that really could be a good, powerful influence to what it is to be doing.
Once you've done the site analysis, once you start to understand the context of the building, what is the rough general shape, arrangement of the building? Is it low and flat and broad? Is it tall and skinny and slender? Is it some combination of pieces inside there? Brandon likes to use the word partie, and it comes up every year in our presentation at the Art Garden, where we do a kind of similar recap of this presentation. A partie is a French word that essentially means it is a three-dimensional description of the rough form of that building. So the partie of that skyscraper we saw earlier is a stacked arrangement of rather small, maybe squarish floor plates. For example, would be more of a low rectangle, two-story with an open space kind of cut through the center of the building. So a partie or a massing diagram of the building is something that you should be able to sketch in 20 seconds to convey to someone roughly what form does that thing take.
And why that thing is taking that you'll do the site analysis, and that'll start to suggest some things to you, start to suggest some arrangement. So you should be able to like draw over top of that and go, all right, well this kind of way, or this system is going to be the general organization of the way that I'm going to approach the design. And starting from that, keeping that sketch off to the side or in the back of your head, that will help keep you driving in the right direction. So you don't wander off into this.
You don't end up solving for the form and configuration. Now that you've told us why it sits where it does in the site, now you can tell us why you chose to make it have the general shape that it did. So these are all essentially different party diagrams of buildings. You'll do a lot of sketches like this in your, learn to do a lot of sketches like this in architecture school. These are very crystallized, pared down sketches that represent what a building is trying to do with its form. Notice they don't look like floor plans yet. They don't have door swings and hallways and closets and windows. They're sketches of the basic shapes of the building and how it is different than, say, it would be if it were just a box. What is it doing that's unique? So those sketches are almost little cartoons, if you will, that convey to someone what the bigger idea of that building shape. This. And you don't have to be an excellent artist, by the way, to draw at this kind of thing. We don't see enough of these kinds of drawings on our competition entries, and we wish we saw more. The benefit of something like this is I can stand 40 feet away and I can look at that top one and I can say, oh, okay, I get what the basic idea of that building is and it's trying to do. I don't have to read 2 pages or 2 paragraphs of 10-point single-spaced font for someone just describing that if they can just show me that. I don't even have to speak English or know their language to understand that. So that communicates that same idea faster, quicker, in a more attractive way. So if you can capture the concept of your building with a sketch like this, you'll pull and draw in the judges much faster. They may not have time to read every single piece of text that you put on there. So the or you can draw a diagram. The other benefit of a diagram like this is once you come up with this sketch and this is your concept, you can refer back to it. So if you start with one of these and then you start making a floor plan, you can know if you're getting lost by looking back at the sketch and say, hey, does it still represent this initial idea? If not, maybe you have to revise that idea. Maybe you have to go and revise your floor plan to make it look more like the idea to preserve that intent. Then finally, you get into even more elaborate sketches and shaping of the building. Again, it still doesn't look necessarily like a building yet. You might not see, plans and representations of door swings and things like that. But now you're describing in visual form why you're doing certain different things with the shape of the building. You're opening it up to create an entry or create airflow or daylight inside the building. Sketch in 20 seconds, someone can look at that and get your idea and understand it. And hopefully that still shows in the final form of the building.
The kind of the big picture thinking is, if you can catch on, we're working from big to small, right? So we're looking at the site on a big scale, thinking about what the things about the site are that are important. And we're starting to zoom in a little bit more about, just what's happening in that zone. We're breaking up into pieces. And we're starting to arrange those big pieces on the site. And, then you can start to evolve something. What happens a lot is, you sit down at the program and you go, all right, I need your storage closet. It's 300 square feet. So you draw your 300 square feet, you draw your storage closet. You draw a building right, whatever the space is right next to it. And then before you know it, you got this little blobby thing, and you're done. And we get a lot of you kind of piece of architecture. If you started from the inside and you kind of worked out, but I think you find a much better solution if you started from the outside and worked in. Allows your, allows the building and the site and all those things to tell you what the right answers are versus forcing it to be done.
So kind of going back to the car analogy at the beginning, if you're designing for us the minivan, you'd be surprised how many people start to describe that minivan to us by saying, Notice my rear view mirrors are black and there's a little curve to it and there's this nice little detail on the rear view mirror. It's like, well, wait, back up. Tell us that this thing is a large vehicle with a cavernous interior that allows you to carry a lot of cargo, and describe that overall shape before you then jump in and get down to the nitty-gritty detail. One thing that can help you make that story clearer in your own head is to kind of do as you design the building. You can practice doing this by recording your thoughts and sketching them, and then talking to a friend or your teacher or someone and explaining why you did what you did, and try and come up with a nice, sketch nugget that really explains that idea. So this is a building someone has walked through. All I know is at first they've got that kind of wedge shape. It looks like it's 2 floors high, 2 levels. Then they're telling us that they detached the office on top and they made it a little bit smaller. They're picking up the 2 ends by mentioning entrances, so I guess where they're lifting it up is where you're entering the building. They're providing a ramp down on the one side for street access, so I'm guessing that's maybe a street corner where people are coming up. There's an urban space in front of that which talks back to context, how the building plugs back into context. And then finally it gets more and more elaborate, and then they end up with that. So if we had just seen that, notice it doesn't take 2 paragraphs of text to explain the what and why. If they had shown me that, I kind of now get what that's about. If I hadn't been shown that, that just looks like a strange shape to me.
It's still a strange shape. But at least you know why it's strange. All architecture is a solution to a problem. But sometimes you have to figure out the problem you're trying to solve. And so in that last diagram, this is by a Dutch firm, and he's laying out these kind of problems and how this building is responding to this, what he's doing in order to make that building evolve to answer these questions and to solve the problems with design. And what it ends up with is certainly not something that a normal person can just sit down and draw. It was some kind of quirky guy. The rationale stand behind it and why it needs to be good.
Another example, just at the scale of a house, a similar kind of story with the diagram. You start out with a prototypical or archetypical archetype shape of a house. The gable roof, the low form. For whatever reason, they're tilting the roof to one side, and then they're kind of pushing and pulling and covering it with this skin. And that tells me a lot about their thought process, and that's the final form. So again, there's a path or a sequence that led the designer to get to this shape. It didn't just pop into their head, oh, here's what I'm going to do. This kind of tells the history of the idea. Finally, now at the third part, we're into circulation and plan relationships. So what you might ordinarily think of as the floor plan. Finally, we're at the level of addressing that. And what a floor plan essentially is the arrangement and internal organization of the building. How do people get from point A to point B? Where do they go along the way? Why are spaces distributed and arranged the way that they are? All buildings have different kinds, but they have an organization system. They have different kinds of layouts. The mall, right next door to us, is very similar to either a linear or probably an axial layout. There's 2 concourses in the mall. There's one that runs east to west, and it's got a lot of stores off that main branch. And then there's another concourse that runs north to the south, at the other end, and that's kind of this branch. And there's little stores that plug into each of those main arteries in the mall. Before you work on a floor plan, as you kind of abstracted the problem, it helps to think about what your organization system is in the building. A radial system, for example, system is you could have a guard in the center and they can look down each cell block and keep an eye on it. In a library, you might have the checkout desk at the very center, and they can look off into the children's book area, they can look off into adult fiction, they can look off into DVDs and electronic media, and they're there kind of as a resource in the center. So it depends on how the building is being used as to which one of these organization systems you pick.
Yeah, of course, another good example of the radial system. But with all of those, it's based on what they're trying to achieve, right? So you're trying to achieve security, right? You come in, you check in, there's a security line, from there you walk out, right? Our airport here, which is actually a nice piece of business, there's a radial system, the central point, and you go out to two terminals. But it's about thinking about what it is you're trying to accomplish with that. It's going to help population path. It's going to help in when you think about the site, maybe you think about which direction these arms branch off from the the central axis from. The grid system is an interesting one because it's a super lousy organizational system. It's almost the opposite of an organizational system. It's unifying it.
But cities are often laid out in the grid system, so not as many buildings are, but going back to the Greeks and the Romans, started to lay out cities with a grid system because you have numbered blocks in one way and numbered streets one way, avenues another way. So as an identification system, I know where third and fourth is, and I know where second and column is, which helps me find my way around the grid. It's just a broader step back way of thinking about that floor plan as opposed to just ending up with a mess of rooms and spaces. This drawing over here on the left is really kind of where you start. We need to know, as opposed to the more finished plan on the side. It certainly helps to see both together, because by seeing this one over here, I know the story, I know the process, I know what kind of led to this over here. I've got 3/4 of this is a fairly traditional linear layout, but there's this one room over here that's tilted, and I can see by the red arrows those are kind of openings or circulation flows in between. So I've already got the idea, and then I see it executed. And hopefully the execution is clean enough, it's still reminds us of that first sketch. Not only do you organize the plan that way, but you also look at the building in section that way. So out here we've got a cutaway model of the airport terminal. Some of you looked at it before, if not, you can look at it in a minute. But the section is as important as the plan. The section is just another plan cut. Jump in and start designing the plan of buildings, but the section maybe even more is more impactful in the way you experience a building. So when you come into this building, you walked in maybe from the front side, and it's got a one-story single height space in the lobby, and then you come through to a two-story space in the back, and that might be something you remember about the building. If someone asks you to sketch a plan of the building this afternoon, you may not remember, you may not care, because it's not as consequential to you as the way it's laid out in sections, the way the spaces change in height. And some spaces that flow, and in particular an airport or something like that, gets even more complicated and convoluted as you're trying to work and stack different plans on top of each other. So now finally, the last part, we're talking about style, articulation, small scale decisions you're making about the shaping of that form, styling, if you will, of that building, what materials you're using, how they're organized, where the joints are. So as opposed to starting there, you've arrived at that at the very end after having studied all the other pieces. And then finally, we want you to tell us, if we go back here, you're going to have a concept statement that tells us why it sits where it does on the site, why it looks the direction it does on the site, how it's related. Under partie or massing, you're going to have a sentence in your concept statement that tells us why the building is broadly or roughly arranged in the shape or form that it is. Then you'll finally get into the floor plan and tell us why the floor plan is organized in the way that it is. And finally, you'll be able to talk about the outside or the inside shape and material of the building. It's the same rough idea 3 times, but notice how different it looks just because of the stylistic choices that come along at the end. But the central idea of each of these 3 is very much the same. You've got a rectangular floor plate that's 30 stories high, maintains roughly the same width as it goes up. It can be dressed or clad, if you will, in very different ways to make it look more traditional, look more modern, but it doesn't change the fundamental bones and structure of that building. This is a similar exercise done with it looks like townhouses, but the big difference here is the roof form. So if I were to say you're designing an artist studio in Phoenix, Arizona, which one of these roof forms might be most appropriate? They're in Phoenix, Arizona. What kind of roof would you go with? Any guesses or volunteers? You're not allowed to volunteer again. I'll pick someone. Any ideas of one you picked for an art studio in Phoenix? Okay, and I think you're right there. So if it's in Phoenix, it doesn't get a lot of snow, or it hardly ever snows. I don't have to worry about 8 feet of snow piling up on the roof. I've told you it's an art studio. You may or may not know this, but artists tend to like to work with north light. So you may not know this, but this is the north wall of this building. If I'm working on a painting or a sculpture, if I glaze the north wall and let light come in from the north, I'll get a pretty even amount of light throughout the day. If I glaze the south wall, that sun's going to go high, go back down, have radically different light to work with from 1 hour to the next. By cutting the light on the north side, it's just a more diffuse general light. So if I pick the form over here on the bottom right, and I had those up facing to the north, I could put a little window, like a first-story window, inside each of those to let in light from the north. I don't have to worry about snow piling up in the trough there. If I was in Juneau, Alaska, it'd be a different story. If I wanted to design a townhouse like this, but I wanted to fit into a traditional suburban neighborhood, I probably wouldn't pick that roof because it doesn't play well with traditional suburban forms. So I picked probably something more on the top row with a gable or a hip or something like that. So again, the plan of the building could be the same, the massing of the building could be the same, but something as simple as changing the roof line and having where you match the roof to the function of the building. Tell us why you chose that shape.
You asked me about physics, you cover that?
Yep. And she got it right.
Damn, I missed that.
So one of the things that commonly goes wrong at this stage where you're finally determining the look of the building, this goes all the way back to Brandon's point at the beginning of the presentation, is you get married to an idea before you know that's actually the right solution to a problem. So you get this beautiful form in your head, you're in love with it, you really want it to be your design. It doesn't really solve your problem very well, but you like it too much, you can't let it go. So if you've jumped in too soon and chosen a form that's not really compatible with the climate or the site context or the circulation flow or the use of the building, the judges will be able to spot that. So to reiterate, it's all back. We can see in the final form that your solution does essentially what you're setting out to do. That is it, essentially, for today. So we kind of walked through what the concept was, different tools that you can use to design the building. After all that, I know some people have been taking notes. Are there any questions at this point? I know we covered a lot.
This is a very quiet audience.
Usually the bigger the group, the quieter it is.
That's true. Was anybody surprised? Did we tell you anything you'd not thought about before? Had you not thought about any of it before? That's probably more likely, right?
Was this what you expected to hear? Was it different?
Super quiet. Everybody's riveted.
Yeah, go for it.
Too much.
I don't really have like any prior experience with this, so it's all very like
It's all new. And that's one thing that you kind of, you become an architect, an interior designer, an industrial designer, and you've been designing anything from cell phones to snowmobiles, that the hardest part about training someone to be a designer is to get them to open up their mind to understand where forms come from, and that there's a process for selecting or designing a form that matches it to the user, that matches it to the requirements of the design. So this design process we've talked about is focused a lot on buildings. I intentionally used a lot of examples like the paperclip and the car and the airplane to show you that it applies to design in general across a lot of different disciplines.
So the big takeaways, if we're going to have some big takeaways, are think big. Start out with a big scale when you're first starting. Figure out what you got this piece laid out. Don't think about it in reverse. You got choices. You put things in the right spaces. People, even young architects, like they've gone, Brandon, what do you do if you don't have an idea? That's kind of the wrong question, right? Like, if I don't have an idea, I'm not doing it right. I'm not looking at a blank sheet of paper and I'm just going to pull out this genius idea. That's not how it works. You work through a process. And so what they'll try to teach you is not necessarily how, or not necessarily what the right design is in architecture school. They'll teach you how to think, right? It's about a thinking process. And the process you can go through to come up with a solution. What's really interesting and sort of cool is that even though everybody's using the same process, everyone's going to come up with a different idea. And that's what's interesting about architecture. People are better than them. But it's all coming from a general same sort of place.
And if you don't have an idea, then study the problem more. Study the history of that thing in the program. We're trying to learn more about the user of the building, trying to learn more about drones in this case, in this year's problem. Or, that's it, just the more that you study about the problem, the more you immerse yourself in it, an idea will come to you, and a better idea will come to you the more familiar you are with the background of that problem.
A lot of times I'll think, I can get a building maybe 70% of the way there, but just one person designing something is not nearly as good as 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people. So turn around, ask the guy sitting next to you, do you have some thoughts? I remember I was in architecture class in high school. That was your idea, right? They want to come up with their own genius idea, and that makes sense. And that covers up their solution. But I promise you'd have a better solution if you go, hey, what do you think of this? And then the person next to you might go, oh, well, what about something?
Think about this. You say you're trying to achieve this, but I see this part over here that doesn't really do that, then the light bulb goes off in your head.
So just the process of explaining what you're trying to do to somebody else will probably make you start to think about it in a different way. So have a little, put your stuff on the wall and try to explain to people what you're trying to do. And I think you'll find that just the process of doing that is going to give you a different thought.
The hardest thing for any designer is to be aware of their own assumptions because they're blind to you. So you've read that program that we wrote. It's got any number of rules in it. By the time you figure it, and that's the danger, you're just assuming the design has to do X. Well, we never said that. You just assumed it had to be that way. You assumed a car had to have 4 wheels, because most cars do, but we didn't say it had to. So we get the question a lot of times, well, can I break a rule, or does breaking the rule make me more creative? And I would say the answer no, is what you're aiming to break, if anything, are expectations. And that when we see your final design, we want to know not that you had to break a rule to get something to work, but you broke the expectation about what something had to be, but still fulfilled all the rules in the program to do that. But just working by yourself, as Brandon said, it's very hard to be aware of what your own blind spots are and what your assumptions are until you start looking at other people's work or until you start explaining your design. It's hard about designing anything. It's you'll approach a problem and assume so many things about it, and you're just not aware of your own assumptions.
Rest of our committees by 8 a.m.
So in college, I had my college roommate. Whenever I thought I was going to do achievement around me, the whole time I was pulling all-nighters, right? So she knew enough about what I was complaining about, right? So she knew some of the obstacles and some of what was going on, but when I thought I was done, my boards are pseudo-finished, and I have everything put together, all right, she enjoyed this, so that also helped. But I'd say present my project to me. So she was telling me what she saw on the boards, then it was giving me a different perspective on what she was seeing versus what I thought I saw. So having someone do that is also, I thought was good.
I would say, especially with process, talk to other people and talk through what you're thinking about, because you haven't made too many drastic decisions yet, probably. So you're not falling in love with something and going deeper and deeper and deeper without realizing that it might be the wrong direction. So especially at this early point, don't be afraid to talk to other people about it, because not only will they offer their kind of take on what you're thinking about, but you'll start to process things just a little bit differently when you're talking to somebody about it. And now it's early, so it's easy to kind of make a different direction if you realize, oh crap, I've been going the wrong way with this the whole time, or what you think is now a better idea. You can kind of go off on that without having this sunk cost of, I've been working on it for 2 months straight, and I've got 60 pages of research, like all this. You could have a wealth of information for kind of the wrong direction, but luckily you guys are kind of early that you could kind of go in whichever direction.
About your own design by presenting it.
Yeah.
So what you don't want to do is get to the day or the week before it's due and then finally lay it out on the board for the first time and try to have done a mock-up of that layout over and over and over again, because that will help you explain it better. That'll make it clearer to you where your design is not achieving what you want it to do. You can only do that by trying to tell a story, tell it to someone or tell it to yourself, trying to understand what's not working in that process and do that again and repeat that cycle.
I would also say just real big picture. We literally just covered several years with architecture education. So if only like a tiny amount of it sticks, that's pretty good progress. Like don't think that if you don't like nail all of this, you're gonna fail. Like you're way ahead of most people. I feel like we've done a good job. So don't be overwhelmed by everything.
Even if it's sort of at the highest level of there's a process, if that's all you take away from it, there's a process, that should give you some comfort in the fact that nobody just pulls something out of their head and it's done and you can move on. There's a process to it. You've got to kind of look into things, kind of work through some things. It won't just poof magically arrive. So you've got to do some work to get somewhere.
That's why I pulled us back.
Yeah.
On this, if you take away one thing from this slide, this is it. There's a process design, like Andrew said, but it's messy at first, it's chaotic, it's not necessarily linear, but doing more study and exploration up front will help you immensely later on.